I think narrative, I would call it narrative, is more critical in this conflict, or has been more powerful in the context of Israel Palestine than in any other conflict I've worked on in my 2 decades of working as a human rights and international lawyer. It is critical because obviously the way the world sees victims is through the lens. They can't go into Gaza and they cannot go into Israel. They're not in the occupied Palestinian territories. So the way that we understand, the majority of the world understands what is happening, is through the lens of the media, and is through the lens of the narrative that is allowed to be heard and is prioritized by the media as well. And I think what we have seen to date is a failure, a whole-scale failure on behalf of the media and the world community, really, to elevate the voices and the experiences of Palestinians, not just in this current context, but over the last half century of the brutal occupation that they have endured. When we hear about things and what we hear about and the way things are explained are incredibly important. In this current conflict, for example, I've seen very, very little analysis which speaks about the broader context within which this conflict is happening. And that is incredibly important because the decontextualization of the treatment of the Palestinian renders their suffering and the violence that they have endured as almost like it does not exist. And what it does mean is that this is seen out of context. This is seen as something that's just arisen, whereas that's not the case. So I think it is very important that the media and that the general community, whilst we absolutely have to speak to the facts that are happening on the ground as we speak, and I think it's incredibly important that we're seeing what's happening in Gaza now and that we continue to focus, because it's not just the massacre that had happened against Israeli civilians, but it's the continued holding of hostages unlawfully as a war crime by Hamas now. We need to see that, but this needs to be contextualized. We need to see, for example, when Israel speaks about needing to eliminate Hamas, what about the West Bank? Why is no one asking about the West Bank? There's no Hamas in the West Bank. And yet we're still seeing unprecedented levels of violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. We've seen levels of violence since the beginning of this year that are unprecedented in the West Bank against Palestinians. We're seeing hundreds of Palestinians who are unlawfully or who are indefinitely detained by Israel in the West Bank. We're seeing the increasing of settlements in the West Bank in the time that this conflict has, this current escalation has happened. We've seen expansion of settlements in Palestinian territories by Israeli settlers, and which is supported by violent expansion supported by the Israeli government. That needs to be part of this story. It is really critical. And why I say it needs to be part of the story more than anything, it's not to say one victim is more important than the other. This is absolutely not the case. But why it's important is because we will never be able to find a way to peace. We will never be able to find a way to moving forward from this unacceptable situation until we see the whole picture. And I think it's very critical that the media plays a part in ensuring that that picture is seen.